Welcome back with me, Storm Huntley. I am now joined by tech journalist Georgie Barrett and lawyer Nick Freeman, and here is what we're going to be discussing. So first up, should all children who kill be named? The murderers of Brianna Ghey have been named at their sentencing this morning. Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe were just 15 when they committed the senseless attack last February. A judge decided it was important to reveal their names despite their age to work out how children could do something so dreadful. But is that reason enough to name all children who take a life? Then is it time to renationalise railways? Now, the Shadow Transport Secretary says Labour will do just that if they win the next general election, but critics say that it could cost the taxpayer dearly. Do you remember the days of state-run railways? Or are we just better keeping them off under private ownership? After that, is wolf whistling a compliment or an insult? TV presenter Davina McCall has said that she was gutted when she turned 45 because nobody wolf whistled at her anymore. But is wolf whistling really a compliment or is it just an insult? Then, is working with your partner ever a good idea? So, real-life husband and wife Matthew Broderick and Sarah Jessica Parker are starring opposite one another in a West End play. But there are reports that the pair's real-life relationship niggles have bled into their work. Would you relish the chance to work with your other half? Or does it sound like a total nightmare? You can give us a call either way. 0207 862 2222 is the number, and that's the number for any of our debates this morning. 0207 862 2222. Calls from landlines may cost up to 16 pence per minute, plus any call set-up fees, and calls from mobiles may cost considerably more. You can, though, send us a message. Head to Facebook or X, search for Jeremy Vine on 5, will pop up. You can use the hashtag StormHuntley then. OK, let's get into our first topic now, and we are asking if all children who kill should be named. 0207 862 2222 is the number for your thoughts on this. The teenage killers of Brianna Ghey were named at their sentencing this morning. The pair, previously known as Girl X and Boy Y, have now been named as Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe. They were both 15 when they murdered Brianna in February last year, stabbing her 28 times in the head, neck, chest and back after luring her into a park in Warrington. Courts can block the naming of children accused or found guilty of murder, attempted murder or manslaughter until they are 18. But following their conviction in December, the numerous media requests, the killers, who are both now 16, the judge then decided that they needed to be identified to understand how children could do something so dreadful. Do you think the judge made the right decision in this case, Nick?
100%.
In all cases, though?
No. Every case on its own merits, but in this case, in every case, the judge has a balancing exercise. He's got to consider the rights of the murderer, their right to privacy, and they've got to balance that with the freedom of expression in the press. Consider how old the defendants are, the two people, the two murderers, and he performs a balancing exercise. The reality in this case was that the two people had already been named on social media. It was already out there. They are now 16. It's clearly in the public interest for so many different reasons. And there can be no doubt, in my view, in this case, that it was the right decision. You don't want the wrong families being attacked. You don't want vigilante groups, the wrong people being accused. So we need to know who they are. The public need to understand what sort of people can commit this horrendous type of crime. They're 16 at the time. By the time they're 18, they would be named. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about quite a short period of time. They will be given, undoubtedly, new identities. So any concerns you have for their welfare, they will be protected. So I can't see really that there's a downside. The downside is, well, you keep it quiet for 2 years. There's going to be speculation. People, as I say, know who they are. So the judge, in my view, has got it absolutely right. They will be looked after while they're detained. They're detained during Her Majesty's pleasure for the next 2 years. They then go into an adult institution. We can talk about sentencing later if you want to. But they will be looked after, and everyone knows who they are. And it's in a way in their own interest. It's in everyone's interest, I think. I can't see any benefit.
Well,
but I'm not suggesting that in every case they should be named. It depends on so many different criteria.
Well, I'm not sure it's in the interest of their family, for example, Georgie, who could be targeted now.
I know. Listen, I don't want to sound like I'm defending this horrendous crime or what they've done in any way, but I do think we've got a duty of care to the murderers. And I do think 16 is still really young. And I think, you know, they could be really vulnerable to committing suicide, to having harassment whilst they're in jail. Just the nature of social media these days and the nature of, you know, how these media storms play out, I think it could have real life impact on their friends and family who are ultimately innocent in this, you know, this horrendous event that's taken place. And, you know, they do have autism and ADHD, and I'm not saying that's any kind of excuse, but they are vulnerable, and they were 15 when this happened, you know. I think, you know, 2 years isn't a long time, but it's enough for a teenager to become a little bit more of an adult, to have some, you know, a little bit more wherewithal to help them do the next thing. Ultimately, we want to rehabilitate them, and we need to sort of give them the best chance for that. And I think, you know, not naming them at this point will help them.
OK, well, let's now bring in Chris Casey, criminal barrister. Chris, now, you wrote a book, Justice on Trial. You argue that children are never criminals. Why do you think that? And does that mean that you're against naming children who kill ever, even when they're 18?
Yeah, 100%. In fact, I would argue that children shouldn't be prosecuted as an adult in an adult court in the way that happened here. It's really a gross form of hypocrisy, and all we're doing effectively by this prosecution and then the subsequent naming and shaming is looking to vilify and humiliate children, often vulnerable children themselves, who have either, as has been said, have some form of learning disability or other impairment or psychological damage that's been caused by some aspect of their life. And we hold them up for public vilification at an age when we don't allow them to legally drive a car or vote or vape or smoke or do all sorts of other things, because we consider that they're not old enough and mature enough to make decisions around those things. And yet, for some reason or other, we consider from the age of 10 years old that children are old enough in this country to be treated as a full adult in a criminal court, given a life sentence, and eventually sent to an adult prison for something they did as a young child. It's completely wrong. It's abominable. I think it's immoral that we treat children in a civilized society in that way. And many other countries around the world do not. And in fact, the age of criminal responsibility at 10 is one of the youngest in the entire world. It's younger than Saudi Arabia. It's younger than Afghanistan. We have to be asking ourselves as a society, is this really what we want to be seen to be doing to children because they've committed an appalling and violent act? Or should we be looking at the underlying reasons and their welfare, and also the long term for our society? How does any of this publicity help anyone? How does it help the victims and the victims' families? It doesn't. All it does is put a spotlight on two troubled and very damaged children who will be troubled and damaged for the rest of their lives. And I think it's absolutely appalling reflection on our justice system.
Interestingly, we have two criminal barristers on the panel. Now, that doesn't happen very often. So, Nick, what do you...
criminal solicitor.
Oh, criminal solicitor.
solicitor.
What's your thoughts then?
Well, it's interesting to hear what Chris says. I think Chris and I probably... Well, I agree that every case should be dealt with on its own merits. In this particular case, we both agree they've carried out a horrendous crime. There was a huge amount of premeditation that was involved in this crime. They've expressed desires of torture, inflicting pain, etc., etc. They were 15 when they committed it. They were perfectly well aware of what they were doing. And there has to be, with the rehabilitation, there has to be a punitive aspect to sentencing and a deterrent effect. And they have to face the consequences of their actions, and to treat them just as victims.
Really think...
Just one second, Chris. Just because they might suffer from autism or other some sort of other mild form of mental disorder, that doesn't justify in any way their conduct, and we can't make excuses for them. We have to protect society, and we're not left with any realistic alternatives. There comes an age, in 2 years' time, they'll be named formally. We already know who they are. In the custodial system, in the youth offenders institutions, everyone would know who they are and what they've done. So it's almost that it's an academic exercise in any event. But I certainly think from their conduct, their age, the balancing exercise with the public interest, we're entitled to know who they are, and that should act as some form of deterrent to other people who are tempted to behave in this way, and take responsibility for their heinous crime.
Chris.
Well, the problem is that this idea of deterrence, particularly when it comes to deterring children, is a complete myth. The idea that there are 14 or 15-year-olds sitting around reading this on social media or watching this program and thinking to themselves, well, I've seen they've been named and shamed, so I certainly won't go and do anything like that for the rest of my life. It completely misunderstands how a child's mind works. Children don't think rationally. They don't join things up in the way that adults generally do. They are deeply immature emotionally, psychologically, and that's why children have special protections in so many areas of life, and that's why we don't allow children to do dangerous things, because we know that they're not capable of making proper decisions. And if we accept that basic proposition that children are emotionally, psychologically, and intellectually immature, then we have to accept that with that comes a responsibility to treat them as children until their 18th birthday. And in my view, on their 18th birthday, they should take on all of the rights and responsibilities and liabilities in law that come with being an adult. But until
Chris,
that point, we should treat them as children, because that's what they are.
Can I ask you a question? What happens on somebody's 18th birthday that all of a sudden their brain is fully developed? So why wouldn't, if somebody was 17 and a half, for example, and committed these sorts of crimes, you're still going to treat them as a child, never name them, keep their anonymity because they weren't mentally capable of making the distinction between right and wrong. And yet when somebody's 18 and a half, you're going to say, well, they definitely had the capabilities and they should feel the full force of the law. It's hard to just put one age on that then, isn't it?
It is, and I agree with you. And the science actually is very much in favour of your point, which is that when it comes to young men in particular, they don't reach a level of intellectual and emotional and psychological maturity that could genuinely be called adult in the full sense of the word until their mid-20s in many cases. So you make a very good point that 18 is an arbitrary age, but 18 is the age that we have chosen as a society to make the age of majority, the age at which people take on adult responsibilities. That's why we have, you can't say, well, we're going to test everybody to see whether they're capable of voting, and some people can't vote until they're 30 because they're immature. You have to pick an age, and we picked 18 as the age of adulthood that marks adulthood. And for me, that should be the age. Of course, if someone actually is emotionally or psychologically immature in their 20s, then they too should be given the benefit of treatment and assistance rather than vilification and prosecution.
But that's going down
long period. But that's
going down the train of thought then, that Chris, that you know, if you've got a criminal at the age of 24, we're not going to convict them because actually their brain might not be fully developed. But I mean, maybe this is something that we need to look into.
We do have to decide on an age, and I think, you know, Chris's point is that that age has been decided as 18. These kids were 15 when they did it. They're 16 now. That's still really, really young.
I read today,
those 2 years, they make a big difference in the development and their ability to be able to cope with what's going to be coming their way.
Have you looked at them? Have you seen their faces? Because to describe them, I know they're 16 now. They don't really look like the sort of children that you would imagine a child who doesn't know what they've done.
Hold on, I don't think we can start judging things on a picture.
But they don't look. You know, when you talk about children, you imagine, you know, innocence. There you go. These are children.
See, to me, that looks really young. I think they both look very young there.
OK, I want to get to some calls now. Lindsay from Sheffield, what's your thoughts on this? Should all children who kill be named?
Hello, love. Yeah, I think they should, to be quite honest. If they are mature enough to do something like that.
But the point is, Lindsay, it might be their immaturity.
No, that's what I mean. But in this case, where it was obviously premeditated, then they're old enough to be named. You know, if it was manslaughter, it was an accident, then that's a different case.
Is it possible?
The fact that
Is it possible, Lindsay, to be immature in your premeditation of something?
Well, that's what I'm saying, though. Every case is different and it would have to be looked into. But if they said, right, you knew what you were doing, you planned this, you figured it out, and you still went through it, even though you knew what the consequences would be, then, yeah, name them, shame them.
So you're saying in this instance, but everything in a case-by-case basis, Lindsay?
Yeah. And, you know, you can't just say, well, you know, that person's not reached 18 yet, so they can get away with it. It's got to be an individual situation for each case. But if it's proved they knew what they were doing, they knew what the consequences were, then yes, they have to face those consequences.
Chris, you were shaking your head there.
Well, I'm shaking my head because I think the problem is partly, as Nick suggested, this idea that you look at somebody and somehow you can judge what's underneath in terms of their emotional maturity or their psychological condition just from a photograph. I mean, I doubt if Nick really believes that to be the case.
Not by itself, Chris, but in conjunction with the premeditation, the planning that went into this, the weapons, the damage that's been inflicted. It's part of it. It's a piece of a jigsaw that I think the judge has considered and got the balance right in this case. And I'm not suggesting that in every case, but in this case, the judge has got it right.
But that's a totally different argument. That you're asking whether this judge in this case has applied the law as it now stands correctly. Well, I agree that broadly speaking, she probably did. But that I'm saying the law is wrong and that we should actually be looking at a system where at the age of 18, and just to be absolutely clear about this, if a young person, whatever their age, I mean, they could be 7 or 8, if a young person is physically dangerous to others, then we have a duty, of course, to protect others. And that means a secure home environment or a secure school or secure educational environment. But it should not be a custodial punitive environment for children, because fundamentally, in my view, children don't belong in prison. And you, Nick, I'm sure in your earlier career, like me, been to young offenders institutions, they're basically prisons. And we're putting children as young as 12 years old into prisons with cells and bars and all the other things that go with it. And there's something deeply, deeply wrong with a society, in my view, that does that to children. And in this case, look at the psychological background. This young woman in particular appears to have succumbed to psychological influence and trauma during lockdown in 2020, when she was obsessively watching nothing but horror movies and becoming fixated on horror movies and knives and killing at the age of 12 at the time. So deep psychological damage done. 1 in a million children it might happen to, but when it does, they're still children, and let's treat them like children, but protect the public at the same time.
Can I just say that
the thing is, it's very rare for people to ever do this for a second time.
Nick, very quickly.
I think children grow up much more quickly now because of the internet, because of the knowledge and information available. Actually, whereas before they might have been younger children, I think children now 15 and 16 are actually much more mature because they're furnished with a much greater degree of knowledge.
Stephanie from Powys, what do you think should all... Sorry, Chris, I just want to get more viewers' calls in. Stephanie from Powys, you're up next. Do you think that all children should be named who have killed?
Not all children. I think it's case by case, just as Nick has been saying. Most of the arguments that I was going to suggest have all been said, so I won't repeat them. But I think sometimes you have to look at the background of these children. I'm afraid they probably come from disturbed homes.
Well, and Stephanie, I'm just going to stop you there on this point. We have been told, and the information we have given is that they come from, and I'm quoting here because I'm uncomfortable with the word, but normal backgrounds, whatever you choose to believe that is.
Well, they do. They can't. Well, if they do, well, then it's very sad that the families don't realise that these 2 children are disturbed. And I think they are disturbed. But I think it's quite right that they're named. For heaven's sake, they may have been 15 when they did this, but they knew exactly what they were up to.
Well, Chris would say that they don't necessarily know exactly what they're up to.
Well, that's his argument. That's his argument. My argument is the other way. And I wish more judges had the courage to do this in future, because it might stop other young people saying, oh, my goodness me, I'm going to be named on television and everything for what I've done. I don't want to get involved.
Do you think that would put somebody off? I mean, if you're making the...
I don't know. I don't know, because the trouble is they're so heavily influenced now by social media, terribly influenced by social media. And I believe these 2 were you know, they felt very... cut off during COVID, and therefore they watch some horrible things, and they all watch horrible things. And, you know, this does have an influence on people, very, very sadly.
Can I just ask, Chris, what do you think the sentencing might be in this case? I mean, we're going to get the sentencing later today. I mean, it's imminent. Well,
obviously, ultimately, it's a matter for the judge, but I would expect the minimum term to be set at probably around 15 years, which means that the judge has to take account of a whole range of factors. But what she does, because this is an indefinite sentence or equivalent of a life sentence if they were adults, the judge only sets a minimum term before they can apply for parole. And I would expect that to be somewhere in the region of 15 years for children of this age. But that means that they won't even be able to apply for parole until they're in their 30s. And you just think about the difference between a 15-year-old and a 30-year-old. They'll have spent at least 12 years in adult prisons. And that, to me, is a complete and utter travesty. We're spending hundreds and hundreds. We could have sent 6 children to Eton for their whole childhoods, instead of the money that we're going to spend putting these 2 children in prison for that length of time.
Not sure that's where you would want to put the money, but I get
Chris,
your point.
I think the starting point...
I'm not saying you would, but that's the amount of money we're spending.
I take your point.
The starting point's 12 years, and there are aggravating features here: the premeditation, the fascination with torture and violence, the weapons used, and of course the fact that the deceased is a transgender girl. They will aggravate it. So the judge starts at 12 and builds it up. And I think that they will serve at least 15, possibly 18 years in custody. And I think that's what they deserve. I think they have to take responsibility for this appalling crime. OK,
stay with us, because we're going to take more calls on this after the break. 0207 862 2222 is the number, and we'll see you right after this. Keep those calls coming in. Welcome back. We're sticking with the same subject we were talking about before the break. Should all children who kill be named? The killers of Brianna Ghey were named this morning ahead of their sentencing. So we're asking, should all children who kill be named? And we're going to go straight back to the phone lines because we're getting so many calls on this. Andrew from Leicester, what's your thoughts on this subject?
Yeah, hello. I don't think they should have been named. They have a mental illness, which your defence lawyer was very flippant about and didn't understand anything about.
I don't know if there's a mental illness involved. What mental illness are you...
Well, he said they had autism and had ADHD, which are
neurodivergent. I'm not sure we would class them as a mental illness, but I take your point. There's neurodivergency there.
Well, I'm ADHD and I have to see a mental health nurse, so I would class that as a mental illness. Okay. I also have to do things. Don't understand that your decision making with the disease is actually impaired quite drastically. I do even now do silly stuff and regret it afterwards. Nothing too bad, but I do think, why do I do that? So these
Andrew,
shouldn't have been named.
But generally, you would say you would understand right from wrong.
I do understand right from wrong, but sometimes I make bad decisions, nothing law-breaking, but I make very bad decisions on the spur of the minute because your decision-making capacity is very limited. We're very rash and we make very silly decisions and regret them later.
Andrew, your mental capacity is not on trial here. Andrew, these 2 defendants have been tried and they've been convicted, which means they've been found to have sufficient mental capacity to commit and be convicted of murder. So what you're saying isn't the issue in this case.
Debatable. If they were, that's the opinion of the judge, and I respect that.
The jury.
But yeah, and the jury, and the jury side. I respect that, but I also know how debilitating the disease can be, and supporting and not putting down, and naming them doesn't really do anything. You can say that as much as you want.
Andrew,
but
you make an interesting point. It's a point Georgie brought up earlier that I'm going to put to Nick again. Who does this actually benefit if we name these children, these criminals, these murderers? Yep. Who is that benefiting? It
benefits the public. The public have a right to know. The media have a right to know. But it also, because it stops people falsely accusing. If there's certainty, if we know who they are, we're not going to have vigilante groups picking out wrong families, terrorising wrong families, because they'll know who these people are.
That doesn't ring true with your social media argument, which you say those names are already out there on social media.
They are, and the fact they've been named means that the public now know exactly who it is, so that we know quite confidently that
but what it does is it creates more of a media storm around 2 people who are vulnerable, who do have mental health. I mean, what they've done is horrendous, and they will be punished for those crimes, and they deserve that.
This is part of the punishment.
And I think that's the wrong way of looking at it, because you're we don't have a right to sort of add to their misery.
We're making them take responsibility. We're naming the elephant in the room and saying, you've done this.
Really young.
Yes, they are young, but they're old enough to commit the most heinous crime you could ever imagine. And it's right that they take responsibility for it. And it's right that other families who might have been accused who live in the area are now going to be safe. And the families...
I just don't think that argument rings true with the fact that you say that it's public knowledge. So
Well, it is public.
I don't
it
think
is
it could
public
both
knowledge.
be. No, I know, but before that.
Well,
so
it's
you
now.
said the names are out there on social media.
Yeah.
So I think everybody in the local area would know who those people were because news would spread.
But
social
their
media
safety
would...
isn't confined to people within the area. You have people, as we've had recently, travelling long distances to conduct their own vigilante behaviour. So I think certainty is a good thing.
I'm going to go back to the calls. Chris, I can see you're exasperated by those comments. I'm going to come to you in a minute. Gina from Swansea, what's your thoughts on this?
Well, I'd like to ask the person that you have on video link.
Yep, Chris.
It's a personal question. Has he got kids? Had they been murdered by these two people? What would then his thoughts be?
Oh, if it was a personal situation. So I'm presuming, Gina, that you feel like we're thinking too much about the criminals and we're not thinking about Brianna's parents. And actually, that might be an argument, Chris.
Is the question, do I have children, and if so, have any of them been murdered? The answer is yes, I do, and no, none of them have been murdered. But that's the exact reason why people who are the victims or the families of victims shouldn't be involved in the decision making. Because if you are the victim of the crime, if you have lost your own child in a case like this, clearly you are not going to, your entire view is going to be driven by your own emotion and anger and resentment and sense of revenge and punishment and all of these sentiments, which frankly don't have a proper place in a justice system.
But Chris,
they are understandable emotions, but they have no place in our justice system.
Chris, there is a criticism of the judicial system that actually we spend too much time thinking about the rights of the criminals and not enough time thinking about the rights and the feelings of the victims, and maybe that is where our focus should be going now.
And what about victim impact statements, Chris? That's an integral part of our judicial system now. Are you saying that should be?
It is.
Are you saying that shouldn't be there?
There are two separate things. There are two completely separate things. One is the right of victims to be heard, to make their views known, to express themselves through the victim impact process to the court. The other is the judge's decision to apply the law to sentencing. And those two things are very separate. The purpose of the victim impact process is not because somehow if you've got a more eloquent victim's father or mother, that the sentence should be higher than in a case where the victim's parents choose not to make a statement, because the judge has to look at the crime itself. Yeah. They have to look at all of the various factors, including the age and the maturity levels of the individual defendants
and the impact.
And the impact. You can't have victim-based justice. That's what we had thousands of years ago, an eye for an eye. That was the idea behind Old Testament justice. Nowadays,
it isn't exclusively, but Chris, it isn't
on the outcomes, protecting the public.
It isn't exclusively that, but the impact statement and the impact on the families of the deceased, the family of the deceased, it is an integral part, and it's right that the judge takes that into account when sentencing.
How is it right? It isn't right, because what the crime itself is not made worse because it has a greater impact on some families than others. That's just ridiculous. We can't have a sentence that's if someone's been more hurt and more harmed by their child being murdered than somebody else, that they get a heavier sentence. It doesn't make any sense.
OK, I'm going to go back to calls. Gina, I hope that answered your question. Andrew from London, should all children who kill be named?
Absolutely. And I've been listening to the panel talk, and I've heard the rhetoric about horrendous crime, and it's, but she suffered. That was a terrible, terrible trauma. It was terrifying for her, that ordeal, the young girl that got killed, and nobody's speaking up for her. And I know people say flippantly, oh, yes, well, it was awful and whatever, but it would have been horrific. And the other thing I'd like to say is that by naming people, you're including the general population, because I think the legal system is becoming more and more removed.
What do you clarify what you mean by that, Andrew? I don't understand the statement that by naming them you're including the rest of the population.
Because the legal system is becoming removed from the general public. So most people are too simple to understand how the legal system works, so we're not included. And we could see how the families were not included in the 3 stabbings.
OK, I can understand your objection to not having the families included in this court case and the parents of Brianna, if you feel like they weren't included enough in it. But I don't understand why the general population should be included in what is for the courts.
Because we're all part of one community. So if something like that happens, we need to know who would do that.
Well, Andrew, it's an interesting point you make, but I don't know whether it's an argument for or against naming. Chris, what do you think? We could get vigilantism if we all went by Andrew's books.
Well, I think there's a couple of really good points that are being made here about the lack of understanding of how the process and the decision-making works, including in the Nottingham case last week, which of course was big news, and in this case as well. There is a sense among members of the public, and I do a lot of interviews and listen to a lot of comments about these things, that somehow the judicial system has gone soft and that judges are all soft and they bend over backwards to help the criminals, in inverted commas. The truth is, in the 30 years that I've been a criminal lawyer, the length of sentence for violent crimes has doubled. People spend twice as long in prison as they did in the 90s for murder and serious sexual violence. And most people think it's the other way round. And so we're clearly failing as professionals, judges, and as the legal system in general, to explain to the public that actually the direction of travel has been in favour of longer and longer sentences, and our prison population is bigger than ever. It's almost 85,000. Prisons are bursting at the seams. So it's the exact opposite. What we're doing is locking up too many people for too long.
Oh,
and the
interesting.
impact is greater criminality in our society.
Andrew, thank you for your call. Coralie from Wiltshire, what's your thoughts? All children who kill to be named, is that, I mean, should it be a case-by-case basis?
I think it should be a case-by-case basis. I mean, you can go back to the early 90s with Jamie Bolger. He was abducted, the kids planned it. If children have planned these murders, then yes, they should be named. If it's a fit of anger or spur of the moment, then no.
So, isn't it important as a society we have open justice? That was one of the reasons that the judge erred on.
I think this is, you've got to think that we do still need to think about the fact that we're having to look after, in Jamie Bolger's case, they were, 10 years old?
Yeah.
So would you not have named them then?
No, I don't think... I don't know how naming them in that circumstance actually helped the public's knowledge about, them. I don't see how that aided them. I just see how that maybe was detrimental.
Just talking about the premeditation in this instance that Coralie brought up. So the defendant's murder plan was released in December. It's showing what the plan was. You can read that if you wish online. It is quite hideous. But when you read that sort of plan, Chris, it's hard to think that these individuals weren't mature enough to know what's right and wrong.
Well, I think the problem with that analysis is that right and wrong is a very simplistic concept. A child might know that they shouldn't put their hand in the fire, or that you don't, take your sister's food off their plate. They know the sort of binary rights and wrongs are very simple issues. But what you're describing here is a level of psychological kind of trauma and psychological mindset, which anybody thinking about it and looking at it would agree is entirely abnormal. It's an abnormal state of mind to get into. You just have to look at the document you put on screen. It looks like a child's homework book. These are children. And children should be nowhere near the criminal justice system, because the most important purpose of the criminal justice system is not to have open justice for its own sake, so that you can vilify, name and shame, as we're doing in this segment. The purpose of the criminal justice system is overall to reduce the amount of crime and stop future victims
and to protect the public.
And this does nothing to achieve that whatsoever. And if Nick thinks it does, tell us how. How is a single future murder prevented by the naming and shaming of these two children?
Well, it's not for the naming and shaming. That's not the real reason. It's to protect the public so that the public know who's responsible. In my view, they forfeit the right for anonymity.
The vigilantes go to the right house? That seems to be the message.
So, Chris, what would you do then? What would you do with these people?
You would put them in a secure educational environment where they're not free to leave or walk around the streets, but the entire next 2 years of their childhood to be spent on rehabilitation until they are no longer a danger to the public. And actually, very, very few child killers remain dangerous in later life and remain violent in later life for the very reasons we've been talking about.
OK, I just want to jump in because I've only got about a minute left and I want to put another caller in. Sorry, Chris. Charlotte from London, what's your thoughts on this?
Oh, hi.
Hi, you didn't expect to be picked up.
Yes,
Sorry, what do you think?
So, I think that we shouldn't be putting children's names out there, no matter what the circumstances are. And just something that Nick said about not saying who the children are, and then people's families online being terrorised who people think it might be. But so my thing is, then does that mean the actual children who have committed crimes, parents or families, should be terrorised. Because we have to remember some of these children have siblings, and when those siblings go to school, they can be bullied. People may have to leave their areas.
Why should
So
families be punished for the crimes of children?
That goes with the territory. If your children commit a heinous crime, unfortunately, you can't sort of cocoon yourself and say, I'm not going to bear any responsibility. I mean, I don't know about the families here, but we have been told that during lockdown, these children were watching lots of terrible videos. I'm sure they weren't.
But lots of children do lots of things without their parents' permission.
Well, we don't live in a
run out
perfect
of time.
world, do
so,
we?
Charlotte, thank you very much for your call. Thank you so much, Chris Christo, there, who is a criminal barrister, joining us for that discussion. We'll bring you those details on sentencing if and when we get them while we're on air. We're going to have to move on now to something very different. Should we renationalise the railways is what we're asking. Labour have said that they're going to do exactly that if they get in the next election. But do you think that it could be an expensive mistake? 0207 862 2222 is the number. We'll speak to you after this. There was a story kicking about that he got called Stink because he used to wear a yellow and black stripy jumper. I'm not convinced by that. I think he just thought it was a good name. Welcome back. We are live on Channel 5 with Georgie and Nick. Now, later we're asking, is wolf whistling a compliment or is it an insult? Now, Davina McCall has said that she was gutted when she reached 45 and people stopped wolf whistling at her. But is she right to be upset, or should she have just been relieved? Now, though, something different. Is it time to renationalise the railways? The Shadow Transport Secretary Louise Haigh says that Labour will do just that if they win the next general election. She says that the party would bring the railways into public ownership as private contracts expire, meaning that operators would be in public ownership within 5 years. But critics say that it could cost the taxpayer a small fortune. So we want to hear from you. Do you remember the days with state-run railways pre-1997? Were they a total shambles, or actually a lot better than they are nowadays? 0207 862 2222 for your thoughts on this, and we'll speak to you in just a moment. Georgie, what do you reckon? You're not old enough to properly remember state-run railways.
No, but something needs to be done, doesn't it? It's an absolute embarrassment. You know, I actually don't have a car, and I use trains a lot, and just the cancellations, the way it impacts my work. I often don't get home to put my kid to bed. You know, I really, really feel like I'm at breaking point with it. And there's also just a general acceptance now that when you turn up, you know, to the train station, either it's cancelled or you're going to be running late, which I just think is unacceptable. With that, prices are going up, fares are really expensive. Just the whole thing needs to be changed, and I think this is quite a good solution. Listen, I don't think it's going to be a silver bullet. It won't stop the strikes. It will be expensive in places.
Do you think the strikes would have been dealt with quicker if it had been?
I don't know. I mean, look at the nurses' strikes. It doesn't scream that.
Well, then, when you look at some of the other industries, education, the NHS, do we trust the government to take this under
I
their
wanted to ask
control?
Georgie, please tell me one industry that has benefited from nationalisation.
Well, I guess we haven't sort of gone back through nationalising. So I guess the water industry would benefit from it.
No,
there is definitely
one industry that there has been that was good when it was nationalised. Because I can't think of any.
Are we too quick to criticise when the government takes control of something?
Listen, there's definitely efficiencies that can happen if the government's running the whole of the railway service. So and also at the moment, what you've got to realise is that the railway services are really heavily subsidised. So we're already, as a taxpayer, paying a huge amount of money to these train operators. These train operators are predominantly owned by other state-owned companies. So we're and they're getting you know the shareholders are getting payouts. So there's something that's going wrong in that loop.
Isn't it fair to say that the railways should benefit if profits were putting back into the system rather than given to bosses and shareholders? As in, if you own a company, you care about profits. If you work for a government, you care about the people. That's the idea, isn't it?
That's the idea, but then you look at competition, and isn't competition healthy? If you're not,
it is, but this is a natural monopoly.
Yeah, there's no competition there.
At the moment, there's competition. And
not really. Not when you actually really drill down to it. If you look look at it as sort of looking at, you know, actually as a consumer turning up, being, you know, if I'm going to Birmingham, what sort of number of trains have I got to be able to take there?
Well, in the tendering process, there's competition, isn't
Yeah,
there?
but not many. If you actually look at how many people go out to tenders, sometimes it's just one company applying to that.
Okay. If you look, history has shown that when the railways were nationalised, it was appalling. They were old-fashioned, unreliable. At least now there's been huge investment in the stations, in the carriages. The problem is surely the strikes, isn't it? Isn't the fact that the unions need to be dealt with? And if you nationalise them, it's going to, and you know, if we have a Labour government winning the next election, the problems are going to be even worse because the unions are actually going to be controlling the railways. That's the reality of the situation. So I think competition is good. I think that if we sort the strikes out, everything within the railways is good. The fare increases are capped. And there's one point I'd like to make. If we nationalise, there's one train company alone that will have a £1 billion hit. OK, now you might not feel a great deal of sympathy with that, but you imagine the tax that £1 billion generates that's immediately taken out of the system. So I think it will end up costing the taxpayer an awful lot more, unfortunately for an awful lot less.
Nick has a point with the unions in the sense that could it be if Labour gets in the next general election, actually when it comes to the railways we could have the tail wagging the dog rather than the dog wagging the tail?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the solution is to that. I don't know how the government will get around that because, as I said, they clearly haven't handled, you know, general strikes across other industries very well. So I feel, yeah, as I said, I don't think this is a silver bullet, but I think it would help some of the problems that we currently have. And also I like Labour's approach to it, which is they're basically saying, let's just let the contracts expire, and they're sort of coming up over the next 5 years. So that means we don't have to pay compensation. It also means that it'll happen gradually, so they won't suddenly be, you know, left with this whole network, and they can sort of work it out as they go. You've also got to bear in mind that, you know, there's already 7 operators that are nationalised, and if you look at the stats of them from them being nationalised over the past sort of 3 or 4 years, they are more efficient. There are less cancellations.
Well, we could look at Scotland and we could look at ScotRail and we could look at the fact that the prices have gone up
massively, 8%,
upwards of 8%.
8%. Yeah.
I mean, they're going to go up, I think, in England about 4%.
Yeah, 4 point
but double in Scotland,
yeah.
and that's not going to be good news for people.
No, exactly. It isn't. The fares will continue to go up. The unions will run the railways, and I think it'll be, as it has been before, a very inefficient system and a very expensive system. The taxpayer will end up with the bill.
But maybe
the taxpayer is already ending up with the bill.
Maybe we just have to be more honest with ourselves and say, look, we're going to have to pay more for rail travel if we want the rail travel service that we are expecting, something that runs on time, something that's convenient, and actually that's going to happen whether we have it nationalised or privatised.
I think we just need to sort the unions out. We just need.
And how do you?
Yeah, what do you propose?
I would sort the unions out, and I know you'll recall in horror, but I would actually, you know, we have certain. I would ban striking. I would have a system like an appeal system with ultimately at the top level a binding decision which is legally binding, and that's what you're getting, and that's what everyone has to comply with. So they're not guidelines.
So you wouldn't allow people to go on strike?
No. Like at the moment we have emergency services that are not allowed to strike, the police aren't allowed to strike, the army aren't allowed to strike. When you think how much this is, the country's being held to ransom in the most appalling way. It's continued for 20 months, and it's the public who are suffering, and ultimately that's costing a fortune. So we just need to sort them out. You know, they are disruptive.
I'm losing sympathy with the strike. You know, it is. Yeah, it does get to the point where you think enough is enough.
OK, we've got some social messages coming through. Carol on Facebook says re-nationalisation is overdue. Everything Jeremy Corbyn and Labour put in their 2017 manifesto is now shown to be absolutely necessary, in my opinion. Not in Nick's, though, it would seem, with the exasperated size.
Louise has made this announcement yesterday, and it's typical of Labour. We're going to nationalise the railways, but what are the plans? And, I'm going to tell you what the minutiae is in 2 or 3 weeks. 2 or 3 weeks, I'll give you the details. How we're going to save money, how we're going to do this. 2 or 3 weeks, she said, I'll let you know what those are going to be. She's not told us now.
OK, well, okay. She's given us a bit of an idea of what she's doing.
But surely, if you're going to announce something, you say, this is what I'm going to do and this is how I'm going to do it. This is how it's going to work.
No one in government actually does that, do they? No. I don't think you can just hold that against Labour.
OK, we've got another message on Twitter here, X, Dan, who says, to anybody under the age of 55, the British rail trains were dirty, threadbare and invariably late, just saying. A lot of people complained about the sandwiches too. That seems to come up. I'm shocked and stunned that it hasn't on social media already. Okay, we're going to.
Were they just really bad quality?
I have no idea. I've never been given
with the
any. Were they dry? What's going on?
Only white bread available.
Oh, maybe that was the problem then. No sourdough. Sarah from Liverpool, what's your thoughts on this? Do you think that we should renationalise the railways, and if so, why?
Morning, Storm. Morning, panel. Well, I have mixed feelings about it because I can remember what it was like with British Rail, both intercity and local. And to say that Merseyrail, before it got sorted out by a Dutch firm, was a joke would be an understatement. It was known to the locals as Misery Rail. The trains didn't run on time. If you were lucky, if you got them, and it was just an absolute joke. And as for intercity, as anyone can remember, they were either cancelled or late, and anyone can remember that there used to be rail crashes quite regularly. Pretty much there'd be one a year at the least, especially in the 80s, and the last one I can remember was the Clapham crash.
Yeah.
So you're saying that safety wouldn't be an argument for renationalisation then?
Well, Network Rail is actually run by the government. It was taken over. I think it was after it was Paddington or Clapham. It was after one of the big crashes. Mm-hmm. And what most people don't realise is we still own our railways. Yes. It's just that the lines are licensed out to these companies to run them. Yeah. However, what most people don't think is they're only on a 5-year contract. These companies take money out. They don't invest in because they're only on a short contract. Mm-hmm. So what we should do is take a look at what goes on in Switzerland, because they've got a similar system. And they've said, right, you want to run this particular line or these lines, you've got to invest in them for 30 years.
But Nick would say that they have invested.
Money out, and it works.
Sarah, they've actually invested 5,700 new carriages, 6,400 more services a week, and 180 station improvements. It's about nearly £1 billion of investment. So when you're saying there's been no investment, that actually is inaccurate.
Yeah, but you're saying
there was no investment. I said the companies choose not to invest as much as they should.
Yeah.
OK, but Sarah, you said that they're taking the money out, but you've said two things here. You said that, hold on, you said that when they were nationalised, they were awful, particularly in the Liverpool area, but we should still renationalise them because...
I didn't say renationalise. I said the government already own...
So you think that they should force the companies to...
longer leases.
They should force the companies to put more money back in than they already... So maybe £2 billion.
That's it.
OK. Sarah, that might be a point. That might be a different way of doing things.
I just don't think there should be payouts to the shareholders if they're getting subsidised by the government, which is what's happening at the moment, because they're not making any profit. No rail company's making any profit. The government is subsidising it and they're getting profit, and from that profit, that's then going to the shareholders. So there's something amiss in the way that's working at the moment.
David from Derby, what's your view on this?
We should renationalise the railway system completely, as soon as possible.
OK, but what about the sandwiches?
What's wrong with the sandwiches?
Well, I don't know. Apparently, when they were nationalised, it was terrible. But you've just heard from Sarah that when they were nationalised, I mean, I don't particularly remember, but apparently they were often late. There was issues with crashes. You know, it wasn't the sort of... It's not the silver bullet, as Georgie says, that you might expect. Filthy, threadbare, someone says on X.
Right. Unfortunately, people have this idea that a nationalised railway system doesn't work. It's filthy. The sandwiches are horrible. I joined the army. Went to work in Germany. German railway system, absolutely on time, clean.
Different government, different mentality, different people.
Different mentality.
I don't know whether we can put...
Well, it's a different investment. They're investing far more than we do in this country. That's one of the problems. I
mean, David, if we look, it's a comment Nick made. I'm going to put it to you. If you look at all the other industries that the government are in charge of, you look at the NHS, look at our education system. We've got walls crumbling down in schools. You're going to trust the government then with the railways too?
Of course.
Right.
I do not trust private companies to do anything. Anything to do with the public sector, you should take out all the private companies, because all they're there for is to make profit, nothing else.
But if they're there to make profit, then they're more efficient potentially?
Not really.
OK, you're not convinced. You want them renationalised. Erica from Northumberland, do you agree with David?
No, I don't. We definitely shouldn't renationalise. And the gentleman in the black shirt, he is absolutely dead right. He should be our next Prime Minister.
Nick, ever considered the job?
Erica, don't give him any ideas.
No, and he's also right with the unions. They're far too strong. They're putting this country on their knees.
Okay.
And definitely there should be a stop to all strikes.
But Erica, so we've got a terrible railway system at the moment, lots of people suffering from delays, lots of, you know, the prices are sky high. What do we do to try and mitigate that? If you're not going to renationalise, but we need to do something to improve the railways, what is the middle ground?
Well, stop all the strikes. I mean, that must have cost a fortune, and they've lost a lot of money, an awful lot of money.
So you'd sort out the unions then, that would be your main focus?
Yes, definitely, definitely. I worked and I was always in the union, but I've never striked. So they've got to stop striking.
Got you, Erica. Thank you very much for your call.
Bring back Maggie.
Bring back Maggie. Well, that's going to be difficult. Chris from Hampshire, what's your thoughts on this?
Oh, hello, Storm. Yes, I definitely think we should never renationalise the railway because they were dreadful. When I was a youngster, I used to have to go and visit my mother over in Havant, and that was a train journey of around 20 miles. However, every Saturday, they would regularly get cancelled, and then you'd have rail replacement service. Now, because we were on bikes, there was me and my brothers, we couldn't take the bikes on them, so we then have to ride all the way home, and that happened quite regularly.
Oh, Chris.
So they were dreadful.
But why then, when we look at other countries, one of our previous callers brought it up, why when we look at somewhere like Germany and how wonderful their rail system is and it's nationalised, why can't ours be the same? Why can't we do something similar? It seems impossible for us.
I just think that we've had too many people trying to interfere with the railways over many years, trying to rationalise, and they've made a total mess of it. It's not through lack of money. A lot of money was wasted. I mean, we just need somebody who knows what they're doing.
I'm going to have to let you go because the signal's really bad, but I think we take your point. We understand what you're saying. It sounds like you had a terrible experience with the National Railways. William from Middlesex, what's your thoughts on this? Do we need to renationalise or keep them private and just put more legislation in place? Do we need to sort out the unions? There's a few options.
There's definitely a few options, but I think the main thing is that even if you nationalise it, that money's got to come from somewhere, which realistically, as we're seeing in that we don't seem to have a lot to do to give all these pay rises and stuff. And I'm not saying that they can't be, but, going into an election year, is there going to be a major change in nationalising the railway, and they're going to have to put up prices regardless, and that, like, as you said, not in Europe, and that, yes, the train is technically better, but there's a hell of a lot of more investment than what we've put in, and then we're spending billions on HS2, which isn't going to run the whole way now. So
William, I'm just trying to summarise what you're saying there. Are you basically saying either way you look at it, nothing is going to happen and we're going to pay more for it?
And realistically, yeah. And I don't see there's going to be much more improvement from nationalising the private sector, because you said some private companies have gone bust, some private companies haven't gone bust. So, it's going to cost, depending on which one is nationalised, or even if you nationalise all of them, some will work better than others because some of the routes are more popular than others.
William, we're running out of time on this whole discussion, but it's a pretty pessimistic way to finish the chat.
It's the unions.
Just come back at you, William. Like there are efficiencies that can happen if we nationalise the whole thing. So there are definite advantages from doing that would cost, to save money and.
You can't trust the government to run a major industry in this country. It just doesn't work. It never has historically, and it won't now. We'll look at the national health at the moment.
We can't seem to trust private companies.
No, we need
exactly. Well, there has to be some solution.
If the unions were brought to heel, then the companies will be running fine.
But it's not the unions that are the problem with the water companies.
No. That's a different argument. That's a different argument. That's a completely different argument because the law is defective in terms of the water companies. You know, there's this loophole about whether they need to regulate the sewage or whether actually they should be paid extra for that. So it's a completely different argument.
But a lot of people would say that should be renationalised too. Maybe a debate for another day. Certainly not at this time anyway. We've run out of time. Thank you, William, for your call, as pessimistic as it was. Thank you for all your calls on this. We're going to move on after the break. Can't wait for this one. Is wolf whistling a compliment or an insult? So TV presenter Davina McCall says she was gutted when she turned 45 because nobody was wolf whistling at her anymore. But is wolf whistling really a compliment? What's the intention behind it? 0207 862 2222 is the number for your thoughts on this, and we'll speak to you right after this break. Welcome back. Georgie and Nick still here with me, and thank goodness, because now we're discussing this. We're asking, is wolf whistling a compliment or an insult? Now this is... There we go. This is because TV presenter Davina McCall has said that she thinks that she started making an effort after men stopped wolf whistling at her. The TV presenter, who is 56 years old, was speaking at the launch of the world's first midlife sex festival, an event for menopausal women. Davina revealed that she felt that she had disappeared when she turned 45 and that because nobody wolf whistled at her anymore. But is wolf whistling a compliment or is it an insult is what we're asking. 0207 862 2222 is the number. What do we think? Nick, I'll go to the man on the panel. Why not? Have you ever wolf whistled at anybody?
I'm bound to have done at some stage in my
life.
And probably.
Would it have been a compliment?
Oh, definitely. Absolutely. Really? I would never dream of doing it to insult anyone. So I think if it's almost like smiling at someone. If it's appropriate, you can tell that in my case, the lady will be confident enough not to be offended by it. So it's a judgment. It's a subjective situation. It's a judgment. The last thing you want to do is make someone feel uncomfortable or intimidated. But if you look at someone...
Subjective. That's a good word to use.
Subjective.
Is it?
No, I'm saying it's subjective. So what you're doing is you're weighing up a situation. You're thinking, you're confident, you look nice, we seem to have something going, I'm going to whistle and see how you react. And it will probably be reacted to with the way it's intended. Smile, it's like saying, you know, I like your dress or I like your hairstyle. It's harmless banter, OK? That's how it should be. You certainly don't want to be wolf whistling when it's inappropriate. So, for example, at young children or just every day, or if you're out jogging or something like that, when people are slightly vulnerable, you've got to pick your occasion, pick the occasion. So it's every case on its own merits.
Interesting. I mean, you said not at young children. A lot of these times men are wolf whistling. It's at, you know, very young women, kind of inappropriately young.
And that would be inappropriate.
You don't know the individual. You don't know how old they are. I don't know, Georgie, how do you feel?
I find it really offensive. Even just hearing that little, you know, thing that you put on then, there is something about it that is quite intimidating. It makes me just feel a bit uncomfortable. I'm sure most women have experienced it. You don't know where to look if you're walking down the street and someone wolf whistles at you, because it obviously sort of gets your attention. You think, oh, someone's, you know, making some noise, but you know that you need to keep your eyes trained forward so you don't give them any attention. You just feel a bit objectified and a bit leered at.
Could you not take it as a compliment?
Well, potentially, but I just think that most... So listen, some women may take it as a compliment, and they have every right to, you know, feel like that. I would say the majority of women, though, would feel uncomfortable by it. And I think as soon as you start to enter into the world where actually most women, it actively makes them feel a bit icky, then I think we've just got to say, let's just not do that ever, shall we? Now, I do get Davina's point, which is she basically said at age 45, she suddenly felt like she disappeared. And I think this is a point which is saying that, you know, if women all your life you've been judged on your looks, you've been, you know, that's where your value lies, and so society tells you that, then yes, at age 45, if suddenly you're not getting those compliments and you're not being
really
seen in that way...
That's really sexist. I don't think it works that way. I think your looks is part of your ability to interact, communicate, is part of a skill set. And all a guy is doing in wolf whistling is, if you like, is complimenting you on that skill set.
But it doesn't happen that much the other way around. Again, let's never say never, but yes. Basically, if you've sort of been told all your life that that's where your value lies, and then
that you're good looking and you've got nothing else?
But that's ultimately the subliminal messages
of men, women feel, and that's what Davina is saying. All of a sudden, you reach a certain age as a woman, and it might be after menopause, after you stop having that reproductive ability, and you're just seen as you're not even seen. You're now wallpaper, invisible. And she just didn't want to be invisible anymore.
But I suspect if you said to her, "Listen, you've only got on with your very successful career because of your looks and no talent," she'd be mortified, wouldn't she?
But I don't
I think that's probably true. I don't think that's the truth of the situation, but that's certainly how she felt after she turned 45. The in-party situation, which is what she said, that she didn't have any value, anything to say because she wasn't.
How would you feel if someone wolf whistled you?
Well, I get quite nervous walking past building sites. Not anymore, because I'm getting older, but that's the point. I'm only 36.
Oh,
and so it means that the majority of women that are getting wolf whistled are potentially under 20. And
but you say nervous. Is it that nervous because you're programmed to
all of a sudden you're like, I don't want attention.
Yeah, that's what I feel like.
Maybe it's a generation thing, because I know, including some of your contributors on the show, that are offended because they're of an age now where men stop wolf whistling at them,
I know,
and
but
they're actually complaining.
The point.
And don't people generally maybe like to feel attractive, that you get dressed up, you put your makeup on, you want to feel attractive, and the purpose of a wolf whistle isn't to sexually intimidate generally, it's just to sort of say, yeah, you look good. That's it.
Yes, but there are other ways of doing that exclude the making most women feel uncomfortable.
Let's go to the calls. Joanna from London, what's your thoughts on wolf whistling? Is it a compliment or an insult?
Hello, a complete insult.
Oh. In what way? Because I suppose the individual's wolf whistling because they've looked at you. I'm saying look down because I'm imagining them on scaffolding. It's a terrible generalisation, but in my experience, that is the only time it would generally happen. But they've looked down and they've went, oh, she's a bit of all right, and then decided to follow up on that thought with a wolf whistle to let you know you've done all right today.
I would say that women don't dress themselves up to impress men. They do it for themselves. And
I would say
if you're not in a setting where you are out in a social place where you are looking for attention from people, or a place where it would be more popular to have that, then if you're just walking down the street, you need to be left alone. It's rude, it's intrusive. You get insults if you don't respond as well. So
I know. Tell me about it. And they can be quite aggressive. I suppose the way it feels for me, and I don't know whether, Georgia, you would agree with this, it's almost like I'm just walking down the street, minding my own business, and then somebody throws a spotlight on me, and all of a sudden everybody's looking at me. And you almost have to hold your breath and just keep walking until the feeling goes over.
Where'd you put your eyes? Make sure you don't
I wonder
engage.
whether, actually, when it's on a building site and there's that camaraderie around all the lads on there, it's not really towards the women or has anything to do with the women. It's like a nudge to the men. Look how... like a bonding experience between them.
It's a human banter, isn't it? It's just a bit
but
of...
at a female's expense.
What can I ask this question? Why is this now something that women take offence to, whereas 15, 20 years ago, they loved it?
I think they did take offence to it.
Really?
Now. Yeah,
we're just emboldened now to tell you to...
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I think people did feel intimidated.
Joanna, thank you very much for your call. I'm just going to look up some social messages that we've been getting in on this, which is great. Joe on Twitter says, to me, it would be neither. I couldn't imagine I would be either insulted or feel complimented. I'm surprised people even still do this. To be honest, I'm often quite surprised they still do it. Paula on Twitter, and I don't know whether I would consider it an insult, just something I didn't want in the day. Paula on Twitter says, if the guy was a hottie, I wouldn't mind. Oh, Paula. But if he was a creepy, unattractive man, I'd be furious. Interesting point, Paula, because this goes to the crux of the matter when it comes to flirting, because this isn't just wolf whistling, but this is like slightly different when you're at a bar or something. What's the difference between someone being creepy and someone being flirtatious? And is it actually just your individual attraction towards them, Georgie?
I think it's all about reading the situation, which is what you were sort of saying with the wolf whistling. But I think wolf whistling is a very risky technique of giving a lady a compliment. There's other nicer ways you can do it where it lands softly, where it genuinely makes people feel like, oh, thank you. Yeah, no, I have, done my hair, or I do feel really nice today. Yeah. And I just don't think wolf whistling ever falls into that category. It can fall into that category enough that women go, okay, I'll take it because I want to.
So when a lady's got dressed and she's feeling great, she's walking along in her jeans and in a T-shirt and she's, you know, she's feeling really good about herself, and some guy at a building site just nicely wolf whistles. She can smile, it can put a spring in her step.
I suppose, Nick,
is it
because
harmful?
she doesn't care what that man thinks. Why does that man think that she cares what he thinks?
How do you know she doesn't care?
I'm just saying,
Well,
women,
she might care.
Lots of
you might be very.
If she's got enough self-esteem and she's feeling fabulous.
How many people are there with that degree of self-esteem? Most people aren't as confident as you.
I would want my husband to compliment me, but I wouldn't want somebody just randomly on the street.
No, I understand that, but you're assuming they're married. They might not be married. They might just want. They might be a bit insecure, and they just might want a bit of a boost.
OK, let's go back to the calls. Robin from Gloucestershire, have you ever wolf whistled somebody?
No, because I can't really whistle very well.
That's one thing.
That will hold you back.
Yes, indeed.
If you were to wolf whistle, would it be intended as a compliment?
It goes both ways, I think, because my ex-wife, very attractive woman, she used to worry that if the whistling stopped, she was more worried about morning Mrs. would terrify her.
I missed that. I don't understand the reference. What was that? Morning Mrs.?
Morning Mrs. would be actually the one that would worry her. She'd rather have a
morning Mrs. because it means she's getting a bit older.
Exactly.
Got you. Yes, I know, but why should a woman's self-esteem be judged upon how a man refers to her on the street? I wonder whether, Robin, the reason wolf whistling is also can be quite intimidating for a woman is because there is a sexual element to it. You wouldn't wolf whistle at your daughter, would you?
No.
No, and why wouldn't you wolf whistle at your daughter?
It'd be inappropriate.
Yeah, but you would tell your daughter you look beautiful.
Yeah, you would, because it's someone you know, you've got a connection. Because you've got a connection. Wolf whistling is it's a peripheral flirtation, isn't it? It's a very edgy, you know, mild flirtation, and it's not designed to insult. But or you might actually, if your daughter walked in and go, you might wolf whistle and say, wow, you look good today. You could do that. Yeah. You could do.
I'm sure it would be tongue-in-cheek.
Yeah, of course it would be, but how do you know when you'd wolf whistle? It's just mild, isn't it?
Well, Robin...
It's in the intention, isn't it?
Thank you for your call. Norma from West Midlands, what's your views on wolf whistling? Do you enjoy it?
I used to find it slightly embarrassing as a girl of 18 when I was the only girl working on a building site in the office with the site manager, and I'd have to walk onto site every morning at about 10 to 9, and all the men stopped work and wolf whistled me. And yet, when they came into the office, they were like little lambs and just stood there like naughty boys.
But this is me getting to the crux of the matter, Norma. So do you think when they were wolf whistling, it was for you, or do you think it was the camaraderie of, oh, now we've all got a bit of confidence, we can let her know that she's real? Because they didn't actually have the confidence to just come down and do it respectfully to your face.
No, I think it was just the fact that they appreciated having a young and reasonably attractive lady.
Norma, you're being modest. I'm sure you were fabulously attractive, and I'm sure you still are. So you think that it's a compliment then, I'm hearing, really?
Well, I didn't find it so much a compliment as rather embarrassing, to tell you the truth. Yeah. But they were all nice chaps, and as I say, they were all very respectful.
How long ago was that?
Well, I'm 84 now, so you...
So your theory, Nick, that wolf whistling back in the day was...
Yeah, I understand, but isn't it also, from a male perspective, lots of men lack confidence in communicating with the opposite sex, so they're quite safe because it's from a distance, so they're not going to necessarily be rejected.
But is the woman
You're almost
safe?
doing something like, I think you look good, and you can't say, no, I don't want to dance. You're not going to. You're going to avoid that rejection.
True.
And so maybe that's male insecurity.
But you're not giving the woman the protection that perhaps she deserves. Norma, thank you. Wendy from Southampton, just very quickly on a last call. What's your thoughts?
I am coming up for my 84th birthday.
Congratulations.
I would love to be wolf whistled. I get compliments on the way I dress, which I value and appreciate.
Nice.
But wolf whistling is gone, but good for Davina. I'm with her all the way.
Yeah, but isn't there a nicer way? Like if somebody said, oh, Wendy, I absolutely adore your dress. You look stunning today.
I get that. I do get that.
Isn't that much nicer than a...
Both.
No, I want both.
Wendy, I can't argue with you then. No. I hope you get both. I just hope I don't. OK, we put this to a Twitter vote, and here are the results. They're in. 32% think the wolf whistling is an insult. 68% of you reckon it is a compliment.
That surprises me.
I'd love to know what proportion of people who voted were male and female.
True. Yes, we need to get that breakdown.
OK, thank you very much, Joanne. We're going to move on now. Alexis is here with us in the studio. Let's find out what is happening in Alexis and Conran and Friends later. That's not me. I didn't do it.
Who was that? Thank you, Storm. Look, we've got a brilliant show lined up for you today. As it's Friday, we, of course, give the viewers the chance to call up and take control of the conversation by having a rant of their own and get it off your chest at the end of the show. So whatever's been bugging you, give us a call, let us know about it. And today we're going to be joined by DIY expert Joe Bahari, who'll be here to give us tips on keeping your home warm. Some experts are forecasting that temperatures will drop dramatically this month, so stay tuned to hear how you can get your home prepared for the cold. In a moment, though, we want your calls as we're asking, would you send your children to private school if you could afford it? It can cost an average £15,000 a year with a promise of a better education. But do you think private schools are value for money? And would you send your own child if you could afford it? Give us a call. Let us know what you think.
You do get those calls in now. All it's time for me to do is thank my wonderful panel, Georgie and Nick. Thank you for being so fabulous today. It was such a great show. I'll be back on Monday. Until then, have a lovely weekend and get your calls in for Alexis. He'll be back right after this break.